Today I want to share a perspective with you that I feel like can give a lot of motivation and simplify this complicated world we live in. Video games have tried to become as realistic as possible over the last years, and not only look-wise. Certain mechanics and other elements try to become as close as possible to how they play out in real life. This of course is referencing mostly to role-play games, so-called RPGs, in which we can find an interesting element which can be applied to our own lives. The goal of most RPGs is, besides following a certain storyline, to level up your character, improve their stats, and gain more skills to master higher levels with more difficult challenges. This is what we want to look at today. RPGs over the years have adapted different systems to promise continuous improvement in certain abilities, skills, or skill trees. One mechanic, which comes really close to how it is in real life, is that certain skills level up depending on how much you use them. When trying to learn a new skill, you will have to start with a basic version of it, and over time you will gain more and more experience, which promises increase in effectiveness, usefulness, and ability to perform it. This can be compared to how your brain forms new neural connections, allowing you to improve in this regard. Only unrealistic element in games is the fact that certain skills do not become less available or effective when not using them in a while, which is what happens in real life. Just as a side note, there is this saying in neuroscience which describes it perfectly: use it or lose it. Besides your abilities, there are certain stats which oftentimes interact with your availability and possible improvement of skills. Every person comes into life with a certain set of stats which differ with your genetic code. It is like choosing a starting class in RPGs, besides that you don't get to choose your set of stats, which gives this an interesting touch. You will have to try out many things or look at your parents to figure out exactly what your starting stats are. But luckily, your genetic code does not determine your future. Of course, it would give you a certain advantage if you are able to focus on these skills which you have a genetic disposition for, but there's also the element of training. Genetics and childhood promotion can be seen as your talents. The role of talent and training in a lot of aspects is highly discussed, but I believe that with hard work you can make up for early disadvantages. Especially in the beginning, the improvement curve is often steeper than in the late game. There are a variety of stats which are more or less changeable. Aspects like your emotional regulation, intelligence, and ability to bond with other people, just to name a few psychological examples, are highly dependent on your early development and genetics, which often correlates. Having more adaptive genetic sources, aka your parents, will most likely be the reason your early development is also promoted in a more adaptive way. Meaning that having parents with high intelligence, for example, will for one cause you to have a higher genetic disposition for high intelligence, and they will most likely also create an environment in which intelligence is well promoted. But this does not at all mean that everything is already determined after completing your childhood or early life development in general. If you want to improve certain stats, there are a lot of ways to do so. Some need therapy or coaching, others just certain trainings, and education/being promoted really can go a long way. Other less abstract stats are, for example, your physical fitness with its different aspects. You can basically make a stat for every single muscle group and overall stamina. Even things like attractiveness or personality can be changed in whatever way you want if you focus on them. There are always aspects about these stats which are fixed. For example, if you have a certain injury/disability hindering you from jumping, you will most likely still live a mostly uninfluenced life, but becoming a world-class basketball player is probably off the table. These stats have a lot in common with what we call variables in science. There are manifest variables which can be directly measured, like your blood pressure for example. And there are latent variables, which can often be explained through a variety of manifest variables which interact in different ways, but aren't objectively measurable, like for example stress symptoms, which blood pressure and resting heart rate can be indicators of, but summarize a lot more variables determining its intensity. Yes, this is quite difficult to understand, but promises another quite similar perspective, which I will dedicate a separate video to sometime. Besides skills and stats, there are also consumables. Your environment has an influence on you, directly through foods, drinks, drugs, or air quality, but also through psychological factors like climate, weather, social circle, family, culture, or experiences in general. They too can influence stats over time. For example, sugar. It will increase your concentration and energy levels for a limited amount of time, but will make you even more exhausted later on. Even opinions can be seen as certain aspects in different expressions, and thus as stats. A commonly known example is political opinion, being determined between left and right, or something like aggressiveness or altruism, empathy or other things. If you start thinking of these things like stats or just consequences of an ever-changing development, you enter the meta perspective. There are definitely more valuable comparisons between games and real life because of the reflection of one's hopes and interests, which make these games so enjoyable. If you use this meta perspective, it can give you a feeling of being more in control about your own life and being more accepting of the experiences of other people. So looking at life like a video game, with stats which were given and can be trained, or even in regards to skills, can really organize things for you. It helps in understanding that all people are just victims of their circumstances. In the end, trying to explain the human experience as a whole is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Important practical implications of this perspective in real life can be to set yourself goals, which was observed to be highly beneficial for improvement. It can give you a clearer picture of where to start and where to go, which can be highly motivational. For example, wanting to improve your stamina. You will see that when your stat is really low, you haven't done much endurance sports in a while, then starting slowly will promise quick improvement and you can increase the intensity or duration relatively quickly. If you want to improve in any sport, you will most likely be confronted with the three-faceted improvement curve. The start will usually be relatively slow depending on your overall fitness, but if you manage to gain a certain level of exercise, your progress will increase exponentially until you come close to your peak potential, which will slow down your progress again. More on improvement curves in another video.